protector. The U.S. is the protector of the Philippines. Being a protector ay lagi pong umaasa tayo na the U.S. will give aid to the Philippines. Kaya taon-taon po yan para pong lumuluhod ang Pilipinas sa Amerika na bigyan ng aid ang Pilipinas. Nung nagkasama-sama po ang mga religious group, academic, at progressive non-governmental organizations sa Amerika, nagkaroon po ng coalition ang itong grupong ito at nagtatagpo ng Friends of the Filipino People. At ang nanguna po dito ay kilala ninyo si Ursua, isang profesor sa isang university sa Amerika. At binigyan po ng opisina ang Friends of the Filipino People right across the U.S. Congress and right across the Supreme Court. At dito po, dyan nagkaroon lamang ng isang grupo na naglalabi against USA to the Philippines. Ngayon po, ang inyong abang lingkod po ay naimbita pong maging testigo sa pamamagitan po ng Friends of the Filipino People. At ang kasama ko po sa pagtatestigo ay walang iba po kundi sina isa pong retired admiral, isa pong academe na kilalang-kilala po sa buong Amerika, at isa pong religious group. Ang nakasama ko po sa na biglang nawala yung aking sa hindi ko yung testimony ko before the U.S. Congress. Ang isa pong aming nakilala na ang nakasama po kong nag-testify sa U.S. Congress, Professor George T. McCahin, Professor of Southeast Asian Studies at Cornell University, a former advisor to the State Department and member of the American Academy of Arts and Science. Rear Admiral G. Director of the Center for Defense Information in Washington, D.C., spent 31 years in the Navy service. And Francis Underhill Jr., a retired member of the U.S. Foreign Service, formerly political officer in the U.S. Embassy in Manila and later U.S. Ambassador to Malaysia. So kami po tatlong nag-testify. Alam po ninyo, meron po isang congressman, chairman po ng Foreign Relations Board, si Congressman Tony Hall ng Ohio. Hawak-hawak po niya ang Latin America. Pero nang nadinig niya po kaming tatlo, sinabi niya sa A, iwanan ng Latin America and let us attend to the Philippines. At dahil po sa tulong niya at ng ilang kakaunti po, bibilang mo ako kung ako po ay mag-lobby, naka-rubber shoes po ako. Sabi nung aming lobbyist, ganito, baka magsusot ng rubber shoes dito sa Congress. Paano ako? Comfortable ako sa rubber shoes. Kung ako magsasapatos ng sapatos, sasakit yan. Di na kasi mangot ako. Kaya hayaan na ako nakasapatos. Alam po ba niyo isang congressman, hindi po boboto a pabor sa atin. Pero nung nakita po yung aking rubber shoes, sabi niya sa hinawakan niya ako, I will vote for you. So, yan po yung mga human interest. Ano po. So, madaling sabi po, For the first time po, nakakuha kami ng 5 million reduction. And we jumped like a chimpanzee. Kasi never ever the US aid to the Philippines has been reduced. But because of the testimonies of this admiral and this professor and this, we obtained a 5 million. Yan po ang istorya ng ating relation sa Amerika. Kaya, para malaman ninyo na alam po ninyo, lagi ko sinasabi ko sa lectures, ang mga colonizers, tingnan nyo ang Dutch na colonize ng Indonesia. Progressive ngayon ng Indonesia sapagkat hinayaan na lumago. Tingnan nyo ang British nag-occupy ng Malaysia. Lumago ang Malaysia sapagkat the British allowed them to prosper. But the US is a different colonizer. And until now, they want to be a colonizer by occupying Iraq. Anong klaseng ulikas ng Amerikano? Hawak na tayo sa liit. At ayaw mo tayong bitawan. Kaya, kailangan po tayo talagang kumilos na magkaroon tayo. Ang binigay po sa ating independence, sa salita lamang po. Hindi po tayo independent from it. Pero mo, gawin pa July 4 ng Independence Day natin, coinciding with the July 4 of the United States. Mabuti na lang po, and nandiyan si President Macmagal, ginawang June 12. So, yun lang po ang aking masasabi para sa na pagpatuloy po natin ng pakikibaka hanggang magkaroon tayo ng tunay na independensya.
Maraming salamat po. Ako ang nagsulit lang. So we will collate your 3 questions at a time, and kindly identify yourself, your organizational affiliation, and to whom you would address the question. You may use the mic. Anybody from the floor? Yes.
Ako po si Dr. Martinez ng Recto, Speaker Lorenzo, Tadem and Mr. Pinakatawa pa po yung isang organisasyon namin, ang Institute of Cultural and Advanced Studies, sa halin po ng intelektual at progresibo ang mga estudyante sa Pilipinas. Ang aking pong katanungan ay pinatutungkol ko po kay Congressman Tañada. Napanggit ninyo na siyempre alam po natin na ang Amerikano ay talagang pabor at nakatutok sa kanyang interes. Pero ano yung interest na yun? Kami po sa komunidad na sa labas po ng UP, ako rin sa personal, dahil nagbabasa rin naman ako ng kanilang mga magazine. Sabi ko kung sa oil naman, paubos ng oil sa 2025. Napag-hinalaan ko na dahil nga malapit na napapansin ko, hindi lang po Amerika ang nandiyan, kundi Australia. Kasi nakasama ko po sila sa mga forum dito po sa Ateneo. Mas malimit po ako sa Ateneo, kaya minsan sa kabila po ako ng Islamic Studies po kay Wadi. Kaya na kita. Napapansin ko po, sa akin hinala ko lang bago ko na palitaan sa Wikileaks, meron palang mga ilan ng mga precious metals na ginagamit po sa military industry. Na iyon ay nakikita lang sa China at dito po sa Australia. Ngayon, sa napalitaan ko po kumakailan, hindi ko pa nababasa ng detalye. Napag-uusapan doon na may kanalaman dito po ang MILF na gusto po niyang isara ang kasunduan dito para magkaroon siya ng absolutong karapatan na magbuhay sa teritoryo na sasakupin ng MILF. Pinagtutugtog ko po yung napapalitaan ko sa Wikileaks na may kinalaman po ito sa pamimina. Hindi po ordinary pamimina. Mabibili naman nila ito Pero may ilang po na wala pang lilima, nakalimutan nasa economy mission, na ito po ang kinakailangan sa sandatahang lakas ng Amerika at pati na sa iba, gusto ko pa sana i-compare kay Congressman Tañada. Kasi po, bayan ko rin ito dahil pangalawa ko pong bayan ng Lopez. Ako sa palagay ko personal, may kinalaman po ito hindi ba sa Pilipinas, kundi mga mahalagang sangkap sa kanilang pagtikman ng gusto niya. Sa inyong palagay, nag-interest nito.
Question po. Second question. We suggest na say your question straightforward in straightforward manner kasi we don't have much time for all four. We would like to invite more questions. Pero po ba? Second question. Estudyante. Now's the time to ask questions.
Isang sentence na po.
Yes, ma'am.
Sasabihin ko, isa po nagtataka po yung ating representative ng labor, bakit walang nangyayari sa House? Tungkol po sa mga foreign policy, ang Senate po lang ang may jurisdiction. Kaya hindi po pag-uusapan yan sa House. Salamat.
Komentaryo lang. Kasi tamang-tama yung araw na ito sa pag-reassess sa Philippine-U.S. military relations. Kahapon, ng ika-10 taon ng demolisyon ng 3 gusali sa pandaigdigang sentro ng Kalakaran. Yun ang simula kung bakit nasimulan din itong pagbabalik ng mga Amerikano dito. Kaya dapat malinaw sa atin na isa lang naman ang dapat igihit labag sa konstitusyon ang presence ng mga Amerikano dito. Yung ginawa ng 12 dakilang senador, isa lang dapat natin gawin ngayon Kaya walang tanong sa reassessment. Paalisin sila. At ang isa pa na nakikita ko, 2 lang ang narinig kong nagsasalita sa wikang Pilipino. Ang control sa larangan ng militar ay nagkakaroon ng visa kapag pinababayaan natin na kontrolin ng mga Amerikano ang ating utak. Ang ating wika ay pangunahing instrumento, pambansa. Kasi pambansang wika na kumikilala sa kagalingan ng iba't ibang mga wika. Ngayon, isang malaking halimbawa lang na ang kultura at ang lingwahe ay protection din. Halimbawa sa Tajikistan, nagkaroon ng bagong base militar ang mga Amerikano doon. Ang pangalan ay Manas Airport, ay Air Base. Pinapalitan ng mga Amerikano, yung pangalan pa lang, pinapalitan ng mga Amerikano. Sinita na sila agad ng gobyerno ng Tajikistan. Kasi nakikita pa lang doon sa pagpapangalan, alam ng mga tao ang kanilang kultura, ang kanilang kasaysayan. Kung malinaw ang ating kamalayan bilang isang bansa, lalong magiging malinaw at magiging madali sa ating napakasikin at kailanman ay huwag nang papasukin ang mga ganib na Amerikano.
Question po? Anybody? Then siguro after this, Congressman can answer the question.
Hello.
Okay.
I am Matthew Franco from the College of Engineering. So, from my understanding, that the U.S. is pretty much violating a whole bunch of laws regarding the VFA and a bunch of our laws. But considering their, military and economic strength, even if they are violating our laws, is there anything we can actually do aside from request that they leave? Because, they're violating our laws, but we can't actually enforce them. At least that's how I see it. Is it actually possible, other than a request?
To whom you would address it? Everyone.
I suppose to everyone then.
Okay. Congressman?
Sa tanong ng kung anong interest ng mga Amerikano, siyempre ang sagot dyan, interest talaga nila na ang isusulong dito sa ating bansa. Kung ano man yun. Narinig ko na rin po yung binanggit po ninyo, interest nila yung pagmimina sa mga teritoryo na masasabi po natin sasakupin ng MOA AD, no? Kaya yung lumabas sa mga latest na WikiLeaks kung saan very active ang involvement ng US negotiations would tend to show that there may be truth to that assertion. As a matter of fact, before the Supreme Court issued that restraining order, Ambassador Kini was in Malaysia to witness the supposed signing of that document. So we will never know yet, since it was stopped. But I am sure that the US will not be here just because they want to be here, unless they want to exercise their geopolitical interest over the region. So that's one. Sa comment lang ni Attorney Charito Planas na walang kinalaman ng House Foreign Relations, it's only with regard to treaty ratification. Yes. But with regard to foreign relations, pwede rin naman magkomentaryo ang House of Representatives and even approve a resolution calling for the termination of the VFA. Sa komentaryo ni Wilson kung anong ginagawa sa House, ang mahirap sa kultura po natin, ang House talaga sumusunod yan sa Pangulo Maski ilan kami mga progresibo na nag-iingay sa loob, kung hindi i-agenda yung pagdinig hinggil sa resolution ko o resolution ng akbayan or bayan muna for that matter, talagang hindi papansinin. No? Tama ang panawagan na challenge ang ating Pangulo. Siya po ay aalis sa susunod na linggo. I think to attend, first there was a mistake on the announcement that it would have been a state visit, but it was an invitation by President Obama, if I'm not mistaken, to attend the Open Governance Forum in the United States that is slated on the September 20 onwards. Nakakatawa nga, open governance yung FOI, hindi nga ma-actionan. And that is also the reason why we are all wondering what happened to the review, is because we don't have any information if actually there is really a review that is happening, or it is only statements coming from the office of the executive secretary. What I can say is that there was a oversight, BFAO congressional oversight committee hearing that was held. It was only held once, and nagulat nga yung mga progresibong mga kasama sa Kongreso dahil hindi nila alam. Nung nabalitaan ko, sinabihan ko sila na mag-attend dahil importanteng malaman kung anong pag-uusapan. After that one hearing, nothing was heard about that. Now, with regard to the question from the student from engineering, what can we do? Well, I think the Supreme Court had already laid its cards. It's really up to the President right now on if he really wants to come out with a clear policy position with regard to the visiting forces agreement. Sayang naman binanggit po niya nung nakaburol yung kanyang nanay, siya po ay anti-bases, pero tumahimik lang po siya, no, dahil ang nanay niya ang Pangulo ng ating bansa. Sana yung position niya tungkol dito sa visiting forces agreement na maging mas maliwanag, lalo-lalo na alam naman po niya yung mga lopsided provisions of this agreement. So in real, it is really the President's call, no, right now on what he wants to do. Secondly, it is also the Senate. If they want really by a majority vote to advise the President to terminate the bases, then the visiting forces agreement, that they could do so. What we have right now is a resolution of termination coming from Senator Santiago, but I don't know if majority of the senators have signed.
Thank you, Congressman. Attorney Evalyn, you want to respond?
Yung tanong ng engineering student, gusto kong sagutin sa ibang level siguro kasi iba yung pagka-appreciate ko ng tanong. Parang kaya ba natin, or siguro dun sa legal na tanong na kaya natin o kaya natin i-terminate ang VFA, in the same way na kayanan natin na i-terminate yung military base agreement. Pero sa utak natin, sa paniniwala natin, kaya ba natin na patalsikin yung mga Amerikano, yung US troops? Sa tingin ko kaya natin, pero sa kasalukuyan, sa tingin natin natin kaya. Kasi nakita ko yun in very small incidents, yung paniniwala ng Pilipino, lalo na ng mga opisyal natin, na hindi natin kaya mga Amerikano. Naalala ko dun sa trial ng Subic rape case sa Makati, yung mga Pilipino na nag-duty, yung nag-secure ng courtroom, talagang pag Amerikano yung pumapasok, nag-defer talaga sila. Pinapalampas nila, pinapapasok nila, hindi nila sinisearch. Lahat kami nasi-search, pati mga abogado. Lahat kami, kailangan namin i-surrender yung mga telepono namin, kung ano-anong dala namin, kailangan namin i-surrender. Hindi kami pwedeng lumusot sa kanila. Pero pagdating sa mga Amerikano, isang titig lang sa kanila, pinapalusot nila. Kaya naman, isang araw nakita namin na meron pa rin itong mga cameras yung Amerikano escorts ng mga akusado. At ang ginagawa pala nila, binibideo nila yung trial, samantalang kami, ni cellphone nila pwedeng ipasa sa courtroom. So yun ang isang tingin ko, halimbawa, ng problema ng Pilipino. Kasi kung problema natin, hindi natin pwede silang patalsikin. Kundi naniniwala ba tayo na kaya natin silang patalsikin at dapat silang patalsikin. Nakita ko rin ito dun sa labanan sa custody, no? Talaga makita mo sa mga government officials natin, parang takot talaga sila sa mga Amerikano. Pag sinabi ng mga Amerikano, ayaw namin ng balikatang exercises, tigilin namin yan. Kaya, i-cut off namin yung military and economic aid. Parang takot yung gobyerno natin na mawala sa tabi niya yung mga Americans. Pero at the same time, kaya ako na nila nagsasabi na kaya natin. At the same time, na-admire ko yung mga pulis nung nagkaroon ng kaso sa loob ng courtroom, agawan talaga yung mga American security escorts and the police in front of us. Kaya ako muntik na akong madaganan ng isang American escort. Ang kakilaki nila, tapos nasa tabi ako, natumba talaga ako habang nag-aagawan over David Smith. I admired our police officers for fighting for the custody of Smith. Kasi ang isang pagkakaiba sa sitwasyon na yun, alam ng mga pulis na may utos sa kanila ng gobyerno. Kaya wala silang choice but to obey the order. Kaya yung mga government officials natin, ganun din ang kanilang attitude dahil wala namang command mula sa ating national leadership na ito dapat ang ating gagawin. No? Dito sa Visiting Force Agreement, this is how we should deal with the Americans, this is how we should deal with the violations that they commit every day. At yun ang kulang natin. Kaya kung sa kaya.
Yeah. First one, then second, third.
Not a question, sir. More a comment, if I may, or shall we do the comments later?
Just a quick, sir.
Well, you will forgive me if my
Kindly identify yourself, sir.
Andrew Abraham, Professor of Art Studies, College of Arts and Letters. And I'm a bit personal, if you would allow me. The song that you're listening to earlier on, Basa Militar, was written by Tañada III and music by yours truly. I came... You may applaud. Sung by Rebecca Demetilio Abraham, who happens to be my wife. This is anecdotal, but I think it's important. This is going to be recorded, and I think for the record, this has to be said. Karina came to my house in Calderon Street, Project 4, because we needed a song that had to do with the bases. At that time, there was no song that had to do with the bases specifically. And this was in 1985. And in preparation for a trip to Clark Air Base, which was part of the rally against the dictatorship and against U.S. interests in the Philippines, etc. And in short order, I wrote the song and Becky sang the song. And in my career as an artist, I find it one of the most important achievements, if you don't mind my saying so, because I thought it was something significant. It became the hymn of the anti-basis movement. Base militar. Pakinggan na lang nyo, yung pagkatapos natin, pwede natin gawin na parang exit music natin kung gusto nyo. I'm going to leave the music to, because there's this initiative that Erin talked about, I'm going to give that CD so that you can play that over at the Club Filipino, if you wish. I think it's the theme song, if you like, of the event. The other important thing that happened, and this is an eyewitness account, especially for the young people, I happened to be the MC of the rally against the U.S. bases of the 17th of September 1991, together with another professor, Joy Barrios. Actually, there were more people on the other side because Cory herself hakutized people from San Fernando, because of Clark, and from Olongapo. I mean, there were twice as many of them as there were, but we were more lively, we were more determined, and we were sandwiched by a battalion of police. Them on that side and we on this side. And I remember this very clearly, and it was a rainy day at the time, but nobody left. And it was a very merry event. It was a fiesta. Marx used to say that the revolution is the fiesta of the oppressed, and that's how I felt at the time. And I'm saying this in order to give you a sense of history that happened. And in my opinion, that was the most important political event since People Power One. The idea that we were able to abrogate that treaty or to remove the bases from the Philippines. So this song is really dated. Base militar. Kasi tungkol sa base militar din eh. The song is dated, and therefore, when I composed it, when the bases are out, then there's no reason to sing it anymore, except perhaps as a historical record. The VFA agreement came along, so I asked Bian Lumbera, Bian, kailangan na natin palitan ng lyrics nito tungkol sa VFA naman para mabuhay at saka para may continuity. And there is lyrics of the VFA. I still have to put it together. And I'm saying this because this is a continuing fight. We've had a fight. I'll be retiring next year. So much of the fight will have to be shouldered by the young people here. If you agree that the Americans should be kicked out in an unequal treaty or an equal executive agreement. I'm saying this also as a personal note to all of you that this kind of a fight has got to... Can you remember in 1991, there were foreign troops in the Philippines for more than 400 years. And we kicked them out, and promptly, Estrada and the Senate at the time brought them in under the Visiting Forces Agreement. You don't do that to a sovereign nation. You just don't do that. Anong pride mo kung meron naglalaglag ng mga ano dito sa foreign troops dito at saka wala kang magawa? Embarrassing, all the things that Evalyn was telling us about when I was on television, you know, parang binubrus ko tayo nasa Pilipinas pag tapos ginagawa nila kung anong gusto nila dito sa Pilipinas. Dinadala sa Smith, nililipat mula sa Makati jail to the U.S. Embassy. What kind of a nation are we to allow these things to happen? Haven't we got any pride? Handa po akong lumaban ulit kahit na mag-retire natin sa UP. Yung kanta na yan, kakatain ko ulit. Salamat po.
Okay, maraming salamat, Professor Abraham. Dahil sa sinabi niyo yan, sa lahat na mayroon pa mga historical memory, bigyan mo namin kayo na magkakataon mamaya as you calculate your thoughts for the benefit of the younger generation. Pero for the meantime, questions first. Ma'am?
Magandang umaga po. Ako si Presi Tabuo mula sa Nagawak para sa Kabayan at Friends with Workers. Gusto ko lang po sanang itanong kasi all the facts and figures that you have presented, we're all pointing to one thing, that there is co-option ng ating sovereignty dito sa Pilipinas, sa ating bansa. Pero sabi nga nila ng isang popular na quote, the old ones will die and the young ones will forget. This might be the reason why when we look into our current generation, parang makakatakot. This is the U.S. Ito rin siguro ang dahilan why bakit ang karamihan sa atin, the culture itself, is a culture that does not nurture our own yung pagiging tayo, pagiging Pilipino, yung pagiging makabayan, di ba? Parang corny. Pag yung mga kabataan katulad namin, lumalabas sa lansangan to say that we are against the Visiting Forces Agreement and this VFA should be abrogated. Pero what can our intellectuals na nandito ngayon say about this prevailing culture in relation sa mga kabataan na magmamana ng ganitong kondisyon ng kasalukuyan nating society?
One more question.
Good morning po. Recto from the College of Mass Communication. Ang tanong ko po, addressed to anyone. Tingin niyo po, ano po ba yung pwedeng mawala sa Pilipinas, sa gobyerno, sa militar, kapag na-terminate yung Visiting Forces Agreement? Tapos sa tingin niyo po, paano kung meron man na loss, magiging loss ang Philippines or yung government, paano po ba makaka-cope up yung Philippines dun sa loss na yun? Ano po? Thank you.
Okay.
I want to say something about the earlier comment about yung magagawa pa tayo bang paalisin. And this has to do with the fact that U.S. forces in the Philippines today continue to violate Philippine laws and transgress our sovereignty. By the way, I prefer to speak in English comfortably now. Tagalog is not my main language. If I were to speak my language, I would speak in Chabacano or Cebuano, and there is actually a lot of resentment from areas outside the Tagalog areas on Imperial Manila's imposition of the national language, which is based only on Tagalog, mainly. Anyway, that's not the point. When the U.S. bases were here for almost 50 years, actually a bit more than that, since they were established in the early decade of the 20th century, there have also been a lot of violations of Philippine laws, very serious violations. Documents recount the number of Filipinos who were killed by U.S. troops, U.S. soldiers in Subic and Clark, number about 40. Most of these were killings of very poor Filipinos who were simply looking for things that they could salvage from the garbage dumps of Clark and Subic. And the official position on these killings of Filipinos were that they were mistaken for wild pigs, wild dogs. And in all of these 40 cases of killings of Filipinos, none of the American soldiers were involved, were ever charged or prosecuted in Philippine courts. The standard procedure was for them to be immediately reassigned elsewhere out of the country, brought to other U.S. bases, or even back outside the Philippines, or even back to the United States. None of these cases of killings were ever resolved in favor of the Philippine government. But yet, we kicked out the bases with a little help actually from the Mount Pinatubo eruptions of 1991, which destroyed especially Clark Air Base. Many of you probably don't even remember the Mount Pinatubo eruptions of 1991. There is still a problem, and that is the cultural issue that was raised earlier about Filipino perceptions and Filipino consciousness. I mentioned earlier that if one were to do a survey of Sambuangueños about whether to kick out the U.S. soldiers or not, they would probably vote and say, let them stay in Zamboanga. So that is a major problem. It's a major problem with respect to how the ordinary Filipino perceives the presence of U.S. troops here. Attorney Planas pointed out, nandun pa rin yung filter of being a protectorate of the United States. The U.S. soldiers are here to protect us from so-called terrorists. That is really a big issue. Consciousness raising, make Filipinos aware, or even just being proud of your heritage, your independence, your sovereignty. Something that is sorely lacking among ordinary citizens. I would say this is actually exacerbated by globalization, by the process of globalization. And this, of course, is a kind of globalization that is a globalization from above. This is a globalization that is premised on it is a corporate-led globalization. It is a globalization that is imposed on the rest of the world by Imperial America and its allies in the advanced industrial states of the world. And it permeates almost every corner of the globe now, which is basically actually an expansion of capitalism, global capitalism. And in the end, if one were to do a really serious analysis of the plight of Filipino consciousness, the fact that we don't seem to have a really distinct Filipino identity, and that if this is the result of globalization, then the problem actually is not just cultural, not just a question of consciousness, but of a political, economic, and social system that is imposed on the rest of the world, led by global capitalism. So in the end, the problem will be capitalism.
Salamat ka tayo. Congressman, pwede bang sumagot? Or anong masabi sa mga pala?
Hindi, yung kanina may nagtanong anong mawawala. Wala nang mawawala sa atin kung matanggal natin yung Visiting Forces Agreement. Napakita naman po natin yan nung 1991. No? As a matter of fact, noong 1991, they were offering a slight increase on how much they would pay us for the lease of the two bases. And yet, we at the time, and also up to now, that you cannot put a price tag on Philippine sovereignty. So all the doomsayers were saying the economic conditions of the country will fall down. We will have a hard time in developing our country forward. And yet, when the bases were removed, first and foremost, we took advantage of the two military bases. There is economic activity now that is being done on those bases, which the Filipinos are earning. So what the doomsayers were saying that we would collapse economically was not true. So to the question now na ano mawawala sa atin pag matanggal natin yung Visiting Forces Agreement? Wala. No? So bakit tayo natatakot? Kailangan natin harapin at ipakita natin na kahit as we did in 1991, kaya natin na panindigan ang pagiging Pilipino natin. Yun lang naman
Erin, first, authority.
Tungkol po sa kasagutan ng aking katanong, ito lang po ang aking alam nyo, ang tawag ko po sa atin, we are an unusual animal in the international zone. Kasi yung mga diktador na nangasiwa sa iba-ibang bayan, yung iba binibigyan ng patiwarik Pero dito, si Imelda, Governor, si Amy, Governor, si Imelda, Congresswoman, si Bongbong, Senador. Dito lang. At ang kandidato pang presidente si Bongbong. Kaya siguro kailangan natin ipamalas sa mga kabataan ang atrocities during the martial law. Kasi nakikita lang ng tao yung mga fitness center, mga cultural center. Pero hindi nila nakikita ang libo-libong kinulong, ang libo-libong tinorture, ang libo-libong nahihirapan. Kaya kailangan ipakita ang nangyari during martial law sapagat ang kabataan walang alam na alam tungkol sa nangyari until the martial law years of Marcos.
Okay. Question.
Tungkol naman sa tanong ng ating kasama galing sa Masco. Yung question ay kung hindi kung anong mawawala. Ang question ay ano bang pakinabang natin sa briefing ngayon? Ano pakinabang natin sa military bases noong unang panahon? Yun ang dapat tanungin natin bago tayo makuha ng ano mawawala. Kasi mayroon ako mga kaibigan na mga magalo, mga rebel soldiers. Some of them have been participated in the first VFA. Sabi nila, mas maraming natutunan daw ng mga Amerikano sa jungle warfare from them than the other way around. Sabi niya, tinuturuan daw sila paggamit ng mga ultra-modern weaponry na wala naman sa atin. Pinasubukan na nila yung mga night goggles at saka yung mga armament. Ganda-ganda raw, pero mamaya kinukuha naman nila. So, useless kami ang kanilang pakinabangan sa kanilang natutunan. Tungkol naman sa yung US basis noon, mayroong sinatawag binabayad ng Amerikano. But the Americans insisted na hindi ito renta, kundi aid. Ibig sabihin, to gain access to that fund, kailangan mag-apply ang Philippine government, mga project proposals, at sila mag-decide kung bigyan ba nila hindi. And as far as I know, at no time was the Philippine government able to get one-half of what was promised. Sapagkat hindi sa kurubahan namin yan. Saka yung absorbent capacity ng ating local government mababa. Kaya, tanong hindi kung ano mawala sa atin. Ang tanong kung ano bang kinabang natin. And that is the trouble also with our negotiators. Yung mga negotiators natin dito, with the appeal television, parang sila pang magtatanggol ng mga Amerikano. And they try to exaggerate the benefits. That's why I think young people should not just accept at face value what our leaders tell us. We should be much more critical. Kasi for so many centuries, linuloko lang tayo ng mga dayuhan.
Question, sir? Okay.
Just to add to what Professor Budong said, it's not that we want to say that as if the Americans will pay us the right price that we'd allow. No. We just want to make it clear that we're not for sale. And especially the way the Visiting Forces Agreement was drafted and was presented to the Senate in 1999. And 2000 for ratification would show that sometimes even our leaders would close their eyes to unequal provisions of agreements just to pander to United States interests. Yan ang kailangan natin mapalit dito sa ating konsyensya ng ating mga pinuno.
Questions. I need questions. Quick question.
Ano po sa palagay nyo ang magagawa nating konkreto para magpasya si Pinoy na gumawa ng executive decision na palayasin ng mga yung konkretong magagawa natin na pwede na rin masimulan ngayon?
Okay. Isa din sa ito.
Magandang tanghali po sa inyo lahat. John Paul de las Nieves mula sa Paaralan ng Ekonomiya. Economics pala. Aking katanungan, napakarami sa atin ang nagnanais na maalis ang VFA o ang usapang ito sa pagitan ng ating bansa at ng Estados Unidos. Ngunit kahit maalis ito para sa akin, mananatili pa rin tayong kulelat o mananatili pa rin tayong bahagang buntot sa tapat o sa harap ng mga Amerikano. Tulad nga sinabi niyo po, tayo takot at takot sa mga Amerikano. So bilang miyembro ng mga kabataang nais magkaroon ng pagbabago sa ating bansa, na nais patunayan na at ng mga kabataan ngayon ay hindi natutulog para magtulak ng isang malaking pagbabago para sa ating bansa. Kayo po na naranasan nyo na ang pakipag-usap sa mga Amerikano, ang pang-aapi ng mga Amerikano, ang pangalipusta ng mga Amerikano. Saan nga ba dapat tayo magsimula? O ano nga ba ang dapat na mangyari pa sa ating bansa upang ang mga minuno natin at tayong mamamayan ay magising na at mamulat sa katotohanang tama na, sobra na, alisin na ang impluwensya ng mga kano sa ating bansa. Maraming salamat.
Okay, last question for the batch.
Pleasant morning to all of you. I'm Almario Tesoro from the School of Library and Information Science. I would just like to ask, in relation to what was said a while ago about America paying rent to Japan so that they could have their military bases established in their country, and also with regards to the issue that we can't put a price in our country, in the sovereignty of our country. I was just wondering, since we are going to be the landlords and they're going to be the tenants of that kind of relationship, if we're going to implement that same transaction in our country, can't we just set the limitations and conditions such as the utilization of resources and the boundaries of their territory, so that we could use that to our advantage and so that that relationship could be beneficial to us? Can't we just do that or something like that?
Okay.
Sir, I just would like to clarify my statement about the lesser lessee. I'm just stating the situation, but I am not advocating that we list. What I'm advocating is no foreign bases in the Philippines. Yan po ang akin. Na-misquote lang.
Attorney Evalyn, would you like to respond? So, anong gagawin para maalis? Then, for the student, saan mag-isimula?
Kasi kung titingnan natin, marami nang tayong tinangkang gawin para mawala yung VFA, no? So, Supreme Court ilang beses na nag-file ng challenges at Supreme Court natin talagang hindi tayo tinagpihan. Kung titingnan mo yung executive natin, para talagang tukan ng mga Amerikano. So, I think sa tingin ko talaga, nasa mamamayan yung solusyon, nasa atin. Yung ibig sabihin, gaya nung 91 na napatalsik yung military bases, paano ba napunta sa punto na yun na nag-decide yung ating mga senators na hindi na i-renew yung military base agreement? Nagsimula nun yun sa kampanya ng mga mamamayan na dapat wala ng military base sa Pilipinas. So, kanina, nung nakikinig ako sa kanta, sabi ko, teka lang, kailan ba yan first time na tapos ngayon na naman, pinaparinig na naman. So parang ito na naman tayo, kailangan naman tayo magsimula. Pero kung kailangan natin magsimula, tingin ko, kung yun yung kailangan natin gawin. So kailangan natin magsimula ulit ng isang political movement para sa pag-terminate o pag-applicate ng Visiting Force Agreement, dapat natin simulan yan. Ngayon na. Tingin ko yun lang eh. Kasi I don't think our government will do it without any pressure from the citizens. So we have to put pressure on our government to terminate or applicate the Visiting Force Agreement. Naalala ko rin kasi, tama yan yung sinabi kanina ni Professor Nemeso na yung ating mga opisyal, sila talaga yung nag-defend sa mga Amerikano. At kung sa sinungaling lang, ang dami nilang ginawang kasinungalingan sa visiting force agreement. I was privy to all the lies ng gobyerno natin na talagang nung naranasan ko personal paano magsinungaling ating gobyerno just to defend the U.S. The Americans. Na-realize ko na talagang yung gobyerno natin hindi natin kakampi pagdating sa pag-protect ng ating interest against the Americans. Talagang ano sila, kakampi nila yung mga Amerikano. So nasa atin yung kapangyarihan, nasa atin yung desisyon na i-pressure yung government natin to terminate the visiting force agreement. And then, ang last po siguro na point, yung in relation to the question that was posed, yung last na question. Kung sa practical kasi na tingin, kung sana maayos yung pag-formulate ng visiting force agreement, kung sana yung interest natin talaga yung pinasok dyan sa visiting force agreement na yun, sana nakinabang lang tayo kahit pa paano. So from a practical standpoint, kung gagayahin natin yung modelo ng Japan, no? Sana kumikita tayo dun sa presence ng US troops sa Pilipinas. Pero the fact is, hindi tayo kumikita. At ako talaga, bilang isang abogado, wonder ako kung sino yung mag-negotiate on behalf of the Philippine government for the BFA. Kasi pag titingnan mo, dapat, kung sino man mga abogado nag-negotiate doon sa BFA, dapat binigyan sila ng failing grade sa law school. Kasi kung titingnan mo obligations and contracts, kung tuturo ka ng obligations and contracts, yun ang magandang halimbawa how not to do it. How not to make an agreement. Kasi ang BFA in its language talaga is a failure. Makita mo na talagang sinadya yung paggawa ng BFA para magamit ng mga Amerikano sa paraan ng gusto nila gamitin ng visiting force agreement. Nakita namin yon dito sa kaso ni Nicole, paano ginamit yon at paano nila sinadya yung language na yun.
Okay. So, sorry, we don't have much time. So, one question na lang or one quick historical memory account. Question, sir, or historical memory? Pero I want to know from students.
Okay. Ang tanong ko lang sa mga kabataan sa ngayon, umaasa pa kayo na sa buong buhay nyo, bago kayo pamatay, kabataan narito ngayon, mapataalis natin ng Amerikano. Sa akin, pessimistic na ako, medyo matanda na ako, parang hindi ako umaasa eh. Kayo, mapapalis ka nyo?
Sagot! Okay.
Ang magandang umaga po. Ako si Tañada III and Atty mula sa Kolehiyo ng Pangmadlang Komunikasyon. Nakakatawa man pong isipin, ngunit ang aking tanong ay may relasyon sa itinanong kanina ng Ginoo na tinanong lang ng Ginoo kanina. Naisip ko kasi na makikita naman natin ngayon na marami sa mga nanood ng forum na ito ay mga hindi pa pinanganak ng panong 1991. Kagaya ko, ako'y pinanganak ng taong 1994. Ngunit alam ko naman ang issue na tungkol sa military base agreement at VFA. So ang aking magiging tanong ay, maliban sa mga forum na kagaya nito, ano pa kaya ang naisip nyo bilang kayo ang mga nagkaroon ng karanasan tungkol sa pakikipaglaban sa mga sa tulad nito, yung sinabi natin military base agreement, yung pakikipaglaban nyo dito, bilang kayo may karanasan, ano yung mga naisip nyong solusyon upang lalong makilahok ang mga kabataan sa ganitong pakikipaglaban sa ating henerasyon ngayon? Yun lang, maraming salamat.
Maybe,
may offer a suggestion. Alam nyo ang mga Amerikano, sila sumusulat sa mga congressmen nila, sumusulat sila sa mga senador. Pero wala akong nakikitang estudyante na sumusulat. Kaya siguro, sumulat kay Pinoy na magkaroon siya ng roadmap nang sa ganon at ituro sa kanya kung saan tayo dapat tumungo na bilang takapagmana ng bayan. Nasa inyo ang kasagutan, mga kabataan.
Okay. The question was crucial. Siguro, last responses from the floor. Siguro mga baby steps po siguro. These students are not really...
Maraming salamat. Yun yung magandang challenge nga na bakit kami mga pinanganak prior to 1991. Ayaw ko sabihin kung anong dekada. Kami ni Evalyn would like to hide that we still belong to the youth. Si Dodong, mas mahaba. Ginatan ni Dodong. Maybe from the youth themselves who want to know more about the issues is to engage people who were there, no? And to understand more concretely ano ba yung hinarap ng mga kabataan ng dekada yun or even much older. Tama si Cherito when she said that in our political culture also we do not engage our political leaders, no? And even the congressmen for that matter, to take a position on important issues like these. If I ask the youth of today, do you know who your congressman is and what is their position on a particular issue, you might not be able to answer. So it is important that you also engage your own political leaders. Si Pangulong Noynoy, no, ang pagtingin ko po sa kanya, klaro naman sa kanya kung minsan kung ano yung dapat gawin. Ang kulang dito ay baka kinakabahan lang siya na minsan nag-iisa lang siya. No? And that is important na we continue to push him in maybe language that might not be receptive. He has shown before that he has an anti-basis position despite of what his mother's pronouncements were, but he kept it to himself. I would still think that position has not changed. It is important to draw him out and convince him that he is not alone if he takes a position against the visiting forces. Because I'm sure he's aware of the unequal conditions. It's just that he's just I'm sure looking for people who would be there to back him up when he makes that decision. So, kailangan i-engage natin yung mga political leaders. It's important, again, for the civil society organizations to engage him maybe in language that he would not say, from the usual suspects or usual people. One clear example, yung comment niya sa investiture ni Father Jet Villarin of the Ateneo. He made a remark with regard to the League of Filipino Students. No? So sabi niya we are already fighting a dictatorship outside. Papalong pa tayo sa isa. sa isa yan ang sinabi niya. So you will see that he's aware of political events, and I'm sure that given the right messaging, we might be able to draw him out and come out with a stronger position on BFA. Maybe this is the reason why Executive Secretary Ursua and the review committee is not coming out also, because there is no clear, as it was said, roadmap on how to view the BFA.
Okay. Maraming salamat po, Congressman Tañada. So sa lahat po na ito, sorry po, nagtayong oras. Hindi na lang naalala kasi kababalikan yung Nora-Honor. Hindi sa pelikula, yung minsan isang gamo-gamo. Maaaring panoorin ng mga kabataan, ewan ko paano yung sinuri yung pelikula, doon ang galing yung kasabihan, sentence na, my brother is not a pig. Okay, so to give us a synthesis of this forum, maybe we invite Evalyn Suarez-Pinta, the spokesperson for the Scrap VFA Movement.
Kanina, sinasabi saan nga ba magsisimula, no? At kanina rin nabanggit, pwede namang may magawa ang Senado, pwede namang may magawa ang Kongreso, pwede rin may magawa ang Presidente. Lalo na kanina nalinaw na ito namang VFA sa panig ng Estados Unidos ay isa lamang executive agreement. And therefore, pwedeng mag-bank ang ating Presidente sa ganung tindig ng Estados Unidos, total executive agreement yan, pwedeng manindigan ng ating Presidente na i-terminate agad yan. Pwede rin ng Senado dahil hindi man pinabotohan ng Senado sa Estados Unidos at yung BFA, dito naman sa Pilipinas, ito ay niratify ng Senado. Kaya kung siya ay nag-ratify, sa tingin ko, pwede niyang bawiin ang ratification na yon. After all, hindi naman ginawa ng kabilang panig ang kanyang obligasyon na i-ratify ito. Pero, ang higit doon sa mga pwedeng gawin, yung kanina nabanggit ni Atty. Evalyn Ursua na doon sa kamalayan natin, doon sa political conscious natin, doon sa political will natin. Diba? Naniniwala nga ba tayo na kaya talaga natin? Baka doon. Kaya yung mga pwedeng pagsimulan, siguro napakaganda ng forum na ito. Pero ilan lamang yung mga estudyante dito. Siguro maganda yung talagang simulan natin yung mga ganitong forum. Simulan natin yung mga ganitong roundtable discussion hanggang sa maintindihan talaga at ma-develop talaga yung consciousness nung pagkilala dun sa dignidad ng isang nating mga Pilipino at dun sa integridad nating bansa. Maganda rin kasing malaman na ngayon, 110 years na po mula nung itayo ang kauna-unahang base militar dito sa Pilipinas. Dahil ito na yung punlian noong 1901. Ngayon, 2011 na po. Diba? Bagamat nawala, napaalis, after 90 years, noong 1991, nanindigan ang 12 senador natin para i-reject ang extension ng military bases agreement. Pero hindi po yun ginawa nang hindi nakasandig sa lakas ng mamamayan. Kapag sinuma natin, talagang nasa pagpapasya ng masa, nasa pagpapasya ng mamamayan, at yun ang mapagpasya kung talagang mawawala ang base militar dito o kung mawawala talaga ang kontrol ng Estados Unidos. At nangyari yan noong 1991, 20 years ago now. Pero ngayon, nandito na naman sila. Kaya pag tinignan natin, nawala nga ba talaga sila? 1991, nagkaroon ng rejection ng military bases agreement. Pagdating naman ng 1993, meron na uling mga packets of exercises dito hanggang sa magkaroon itong Visiting Forces Agreement noong 1998. Diba, halos tuloy, magmula noong 1901 hanggang ngayon, tuloy-tuloy sila. Should we wait for 110 more years? Ako hindi ko malimutan nung sabihin ni William Howard Taft, noong 1901, nung sabihin niya na we will never give freedom. We do not believe na you are ready for your freedom now. We will never give your freedom. Not in the next 2 years, not in the next 10 years, not even in the next 100 years. And true enough, hanggang ngayon nandito sila. Diba? Yun ba? Sabihin, sa akin talagang hindi ko nakakalimutan yun eh. Lagi-lagi tinatanong natin, ano ba yung ano bang mawawala? Kaya ang sinabi kanina ni Kadado, ano ba yung pakinabang talaga natin? Mukhang meron ba talaga? We have nothing to lose, but we have our sovereignty to gain kapag inalis yung visiting forces o pag nawala ang control sa atin ng Estados Unidos. Ang dami na buhay na testimonya, buhay na yung kaso ni Nicole. At doon, makikita yung actual implementation ng VFA. Diba? Saan ba natin pwedeng i-implement ang ating konstitusyon kung hindi sa sarili nating bansa? Saan ba natin pwedeng i-implement ang sarili nating batas kung hindi sa sarili nating bansa? Kung hindi natin kayang i-implement ang ating konstitusyon, ang ating batas, dito sa ating bansa, saan pa kung ang mananaig dito mismo ay yung batas at kontrol ng Estados Unidos? Kaya, ito yung tanong, diba? Partners ba tayo o subservient ba tayo? Diba? Kaya sa pag-assess ng ating foreign relations, lalo na sa Estados Unidos, pag sinabi nating partners, di ba? Pag partners, we stand on equal footing. May pagkilala at respeto sa pantay na karapatan. Ganun ang partners. Sa mga narinig nyo sa sinabi, dinescribe yung mga kondisyon, diba, ni Attorney Evalyn Ursua sa ni Congressman Erin Tañada, makikita nyo, partners nga ba o subservient? Pag subservient, diba, sunod-sunuran ka, subordinate ka. Kanina nga tinignan ko ibang definition ng subservient. Sabi niya, one who follows everything that is told to do so. Parang, ano ba yun? Talagang sunod-sunuran. Diba? Yung subordinate. So ngayon makikita natin, are we really partners? Kasi kung partners, maganda talagang ituloy ang ganung relasyon. Pero ipapakita ng history na we were never treated partners because we were never treated as equal sovereign. Philippines, or any country for that matter, no matter how small the territory is, no matter how small the number of citizens is sovereign by itself. Therefore, we should be treated with dignity, with pride, because we are equal sovereign. Dito sa VFA, napatunayan natin that we were never treated as equal sovereign. Kaya, ang hamon, hindi lang sa ating Senado, hindi lang sa ating Pangulo, hindi lang sa ating Kongreso, kundi sa atin mismo, lalo na sa kabataan. Hindi natin kinakailangan ipanganak o naipanganak noong 1901 o noong 1991 para maintindihan ang lahat ng nangyari. Pwede naman nating balikan at lagi-lagi na natututo tayo sa karanasan noong nakaraan. Diba? Baka doon simulan natin. Kaya napakaganda na ngayon simulan natin yung mga ganitong pag-uusap para naman habang nag-uusap-usap tayo, diba, nade-develop sa atin yung ating pagiging makabansa, yung ating dignidad bilang bansa at yung ating integridad bilang masang Pilipino. Kaya ang hamon na iniiwan namin sa inyo mismo, lalo na sa mga kabataan, yung ginawa, yung nangyari noong 1991, sabi nga ni Atty. Evalyn Ursua, baka magandang simulan uli natin ngayon na. Marami pong salamat.
Maraming salamat. Sa pangwakas, para iba, natin natin si President Francisco Lorenzo.
Tungkol sa tanong kung ano bang dapat natin gawin o saan tayo magsimula. Ang sagot ko, huwag kami tanungin. Because I do not want to pose as a PO or a political officer telling you what to do. Dapat intindihin ninyo ang issue at kayo mismo ang mag-decide kung anong magagawa mo pag-contribute sa pambansang pakikipaka para sa sovereignty ng ating bayan. You do not expect other people to tell you what to do. If you understand what the problem is, then think of what you can do to help solve that problem. I cannot resist commenting on the point of Samang Wilson, regarding the position of former President Estrada. Sayang talagang wala siya ito. So, mas mabuti sana galing sa kanya. But, you know, I was one of the UP faculty members who persuaded him to take an anti-racist stand. Kasi nung first meeting namin, ang tanong pa, nga, mayroon tayong mga American base dito, bakit pa nandyan sila? You have to start from the beginning. But ang funny is that when he is convinced or when he speaks out, the moment he takes a public stand, mas mahirap na siya mag-withdraw. Kaya nga gusto ko sana na pumunta siya rito to come out publicly with his present position. Because recently, he has been inviting me to discuss with him at least once a month, sabi niya. And he already told me point blank that he regrets having sponsored the visiting forces agreement. Sabi niya na akala ko niya, because napaligiran siya ng mga tanong doon, akala niya visitors lang. Visitors, sandali lang. Sabi niya na, akala ko ba pupunta na sila dito para turuan ng ating mga sundalo. So the next meeting, dinala ko isang lieutenant senior grade or captain sa Navy who went through the first balikatan exercise para sabihin sa kanya kung ano talaga nangyari doon sa training nila. So, siya na, sa report niya na wala silang masyadong natutunan, na maraming natutunan yung Amerikano. Pagkat ang mga weaponry na pinastigil sa kanila ay hindi naman binibigay. And so, parang galit na siya. And then sabi pa niya, I will even say na ang mga Amerikano nagpatalsik sa akin. Sabi ko, wow, sige, maganda yan. Ang problema dito ni Erin is that kung meron ibang lalapit sa kanya, madali rin makumbinse. Importante, itulak mo siya, manindigan publicly. Because I have seen na when he takes a public stand, talagang tinutuloy niya. Now anyway, 20 anyos na lumipas mula noong dinanggihan ng Senado ang extension ng military bases agreement. Pero pinalitan lamang ito ng visiting forces agreement. Hindi ito nakakataka dahil hindi talaga nagsikap ang ating gobyerno na iangkop ang foreign policy at konsepto ng national security sa bagong kalagayan. After we rejected the bases agreement, the government of Cory Aquino and successors did not really bother to formulate in new foreign policy, a new defense strategy that presupposes the absence of American bases. Now, so what Senator Recto called the foreign policy of mendicancy and subservience has prevailed. Our national security concept is still based on reliance on the American protective umbrella. At I share your pessimism, sir. Hindi ko siguro na magbabago ito sa ilalim ng kasalukuyang sistema. The system of elite rule kung saan nagpapalit-palit sa kapangyarihan lamang ang mga lahi ng mga collaborators. Kasi if you look at our history, the Filipino political elite have always been collaborating with anybody who is in power. And that tradition has prevailed for as long as that condition exists. So, hindi naman yung mentality natin dapat baguhin. Ang mentality ng mga tao na nasa kapangyarihan. So, well, we have just heard from our guest speakers that all the reasons for dismantling the U.S. bases apply also to visiting forces. It provides the Americans with a platform for interfering with our internal affairs. It puts us at risk of getting involved in conflicts with any of America's numerous enemies against countries with whom we have no grudge. It is sad indeed that Cory Aquino and his successors squandered the historic opportunity opened up by the termination of the military bases agreement. Since I never trusted the patriotism, the political will, and the diplomatic skills of our power elite, at the height of the U.S. bases controversy, I proposed in my column in the Philippine-Diliman that after junking the bases agreement, we should immediately proceed to work for the abrogation of the Philippine-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty. This short and ostensibly innocuous treaty is actually the mother of all these executive agreements on military matters. The Visiting Forces Agreement is supposed to be only an implementing measure for the Mutual Defense Treaty. That is why our government does not insist, or did not insist, that this treaty, this be ratified also by the American Senate as stipulated in our Constitution. I want that as long as this treaty exists, it can always be used as a pretext for bringing back the U.S. troops under another executive agreement. But no one paid attention to me then. Nandiwala kasi, maski yung mga politiko, nationalist politicians, na kung maalis na ang base militar, kaagad mawalang visa ang Mutual Defense Treaty. I regret that I was proven right. The American troops are back under the VFA, whereas before, they were only confined to Subic and Clark. Now, they can go anywhere. And they're not just fighting imaginary enemies, but also assaulting the clients of Attorney Ursua. In this sense, the military basis agreement is worse than the visiting forces agreement is worse than the visiting forces agreement. Kasi ito, ngayon, mayroon na silang mobility. And mobility is more important to them than land bases. Because in the present development of military technology accessible to the United States, they don't really need so many land bases like Clark and Subic. The one in Guam will be sufficient to project their power in our region. What they need are small repair and refueling station, the one deep water port, and an airfield with a long runway, which they have already constructed in connivance with our Philippine government in San Dani Bay and in General Santos. Now, of course, in the absence of a treaty, cannot really prevent a rogue state that is powerful from violating the rights of weaker states. In international relations, in the relations among nations, it is might rather than right which governs, just like the state of nature of Thomas Hobbes. Take for instance the case of Cuba. Cuba abrogated its military bases treaty with the United States half a century ago. Nonetheless, the U.S. occupation of Guantanamo continues, and it has been used not to defend Cuba, but as a springboard for subversion against its government. Well, you might say that the comparison is unfair, because after all, our leaders do not have the courage and the tenacity of Fidel Castro. What we have are the descendants of Emilio Aguinaldo and Pedro Paterno, essentially conservative and timid in dealing with imperialist powers. They do not even have the smartness and savvy of Park Chung-hee. The Korea situation in the 1970s was very much like ours. It too has military bases. At the outset, Korea was heavily dependent on American aid. But General Park Chung-hee, who ruled the country from 1961 to 1979, played the Machiavellian game with the Americans. He avoided provoking the Americans to treat him the way they treat Fidel Castro. And it is now known that he was in fact resentful of the American presence. But instead of threatening the American bases and American investments in Korea, what they did was to maneuver within that limited framework to industrialize his country, ignoring the IMF economic prescriptions. many of the structural adjustments that the IMF were insisting on, they just simply ignored. They did it their way. Until Korea can now produce, until Korea was in a position to produce its own warships, its own tanks and helicopters. So that when Korea could already match the technological power of the United States, Park-chung-hee began to be increasingly assertive. That is probably the reason why he had to be assassinated. I used to be a severe critic of South Korea. In another forum, I will be glad to explain why, like Ding Lichaopo, I have come to admire Park Chung-hee. I cannot do that now because I am here only to give the closing remarks. Let me just stress this point. Abrogating an agreement will not necessarily reduce our government's subservience to the United States. We should campaign for abrogation only to call our people's attention to the iniquity of Philippine-U.S. relations. But for as long as our government is willing to suffer humiliation, it will always pursue the policy of subservience even in the absence of a treaty or an executive agreement. Thank you.
Okay. Overall, it's really nice to hear from those who came before us, especially part of the younger generation. And we will learn from them. That's why we also maximize the use of, for instance, the new media technology to somehow create awareness among the younger generation. So we'd like to thank the Third World Studies Center, the Department of Political Science of UP, and the Scrap VFA Movement. I think they deserve a round of applause. And then for the transcript, I have over here a copy of Deputy Speaker Tañada's speech will be available sa ating Facebook. Just type Erin Tañada by tonight. And then, UP Third World Studies Centers will have the transcript siguro after they will post the video and the transcripts. So maraming salamat po, magandang tanghali sa bawat isa.